kill, burn! Maim, kill, burn!
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of The Happy Heretic. Third time I've trying this video. Something always goes wrong. It's really freaking annoying, so let's see if I can get it taken care of this time and actually get this shit done. So anyway, moving towards a more free-form, less scripted format, mainly because it's what I'm good at. I mean, I like doing the scripted videos, but they just take so freaking long to to edit and to do and all that stuff. So in the interest of being able to put out more content on a more regular basis, I'm moving to this unscripted format. You're welcome. I'm also going to be streaming on Twitch, by the way. I had my first stream last week. I'll put my Twitch link in the description of the video so you can follow me there. I'm going to be streaming fairly regularly. I don't know when exactly, though. I'm thinking Mondays and Tuesdays, possibly. But with summer coming, my kid's going to be home more often. So I don't know. We'll have to see. We will have to see what happens with that. So anyway, on to the meat of the video, what I wanted to talk about today. And that is something that I don't think gets talked about enough. And it is how to thin your paints. Thinning your paints, of course, is really, and specifically how to thin your oil paints. Now, thinning your paints is something that's extremely important. I mean, we've all had two thin coats drummed into us over the years from Saint Duncan of Rhodes, blessed be his name. And everybody knows that with acrylic paints, you need to thin them. How much you need to thin them depends on what you're trying to do, and it depends on the brand and the thickness or thinness of the paint and that sort of thing. Most people put it up, slap it on a wet palette and thin that way. That's what I do with my acrylics. I've also got some airbrush thinner that I like using it as well. So different ways to do it, but the crux of the matter is you need to thin your paints. The same is true of oil paints. You need to thin your oil paints, and it's even more important to thin your oil paints than it is to thin your acrylic paints. Now let me explain why it's important. So, got some olive green paint right here. And if you can see that, you'll notice, I'll get some on my palette knife here, but you'll notice, very oily, number one, but that's very thick, very, very thick. It's like runny toothpaste. Should be more like toothpaste. I don't know why it's that runny. Let me do a different paint so you can see it better. No clue why this paint is coming out all runny. I guess maybe oil is separating or something like that. I don't know. I don't pretend to understand how things like that operate. Okay, so with some titanium white, because I know this one's thick as hell. It's thick with 2 C's, by the way. It's got some green in there too. Ugh. All right, well, let's just slice that off. So there you go. Toothpaste consistency. This is what you can expect from most, if not all, oil paints. Now, there's some oil paints that are pre-thinned, more for miniatures. Abtelung 502, I believe, is a brand that is pre-thinned. I think there's 1 or 2 others. But generally, oil paints that you get from a hobby shop are like, Joanne Fabrics or Michael's or Hobby Lobby or, any of those places. Those are going to be thick as hell. Those are going to be this toothpaste consistency right here. Now, you can paint with paint like this, but it's going to be extremely hard. It's going to be very hard to push around on the Mini, and it's going to take forever to dry. Oil paint, when you're painting on a canvas, oil paint has the benefit of being on cloth, essentially, and having the canvas absorb some of the oils to help it dry. I just probably bumped my mic and scared the crap out of a lot of people. But when you're painting a Mini, It's all hard plastic. Even if it's resin, it's a hard material. It's a non-porous material. It's not going to absorb any oil on there at all. So then at that point, you're relying on the oil to oxidize, and that can take forever. The longest I've ever had a mini take to dry from oil painting has been about a month. And if you put it on this thick, it is going to take a long time to dry, and you're not going to have a very fun time manipulating the oil either. But you can't just thin your paints the same way you thin your acrylics. You can't thin your oils the same way you thin your acrylics. Now, normally when you thin your acrylics, you're using an acrylic medium of some kind, or you're using water. Good old H2O. And that's what this is in this bottle. I use it for hydrating my wet palette and that sort of thing. There's some schmutz on there. Looks like some old oil paint. Let's wipe that off. But this is how most miniature painters thin their paints. And you can't do that with oil paints. And I'll show you why right now. So I got this white, titanium white paint here. Put a couple drops of water on that. You can already probably see the problem and see the issue. But let me get my handy dandy crappy mixing brush and see what happens when I try to use this water to mix this paint. Oh, look at that. Oh, that's nasty. It's goopy, it's nasty, and I don't know if you can see that clearly on the video, but there is no pigment in that water at all. This oil paint is just as thick as it is now as when I put it on the palette. There's absolutely no thinning on that and no pigment whatsoever in that water. None at all. Why? Oil and water don't mix. Basic elementary school science. Oil and water do not mix, so you cannot use water to thin your oil paints. So the question then becomes, what do you use? You need thinner. You need oil thinner. And there's a couple of things that you can use. I've done a video on this in the past, but one of the things that you can use is good old-fashioned mineral spirits, the kind that you can get in like the big gallon jug from the hardware store, from Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart, any of those places. And that will thin your oil paints. That'll thin your paint out pretty well. It won't look very good. It's very, very harsh and very, very smelly. Even if you get the odorless kind, it's still very, very smelly. But it is cheap as hell. So, and you can get it in like gallon jugs. I'm not even kidding about that. I've got a gallon jug of that shit sitting in my laundry room right now, and I've used that quite extensively to thin my oils for the past 2 years or so. So it's been a long time that I've been using mineral spirits. Now the next option that you have is artist grade oil thinners. And there's a bunch of different types of oil thinners, but the most common is odorless white spirits, artist grade white spirits, and that's essentially a higher grade of mineral spirits is what it is. It doesn't smell as bad. It doesn't smell really at all. You still don't want to be huffing the fumes, but you're not gonna. It's not gonna overwhelm you with the smell or anything like that. And the brand that I've been using, that I like to use, and the one that is probably the cheapest of the artist grade white spirits that I can find, is this Mona Lisa odorless paint thinner. This is 8 ounces. I got this at Michael's. I believe it was $8 or $9. So not too terrible. Now there are other higher grade white spirits. You've got Winsor & Newton. That is going to be very expensive. Winsor & Newton, you're going to have probably half this amount for the same price. It comes in a little tiny bottle, and it's going to run you at least probably $8 to $10. And you get the bigger bottles, and you're looking at $15 easy. So you can use that if you want. It's expensive as hell. That is kind of the top of the line, but this stuff is a lot cheaper and does the exact same thing. It really does. There's no difference. And if you want to go even cheaper, use mineral spirits, odorless mineral spirits. That'll do you just fine. Now, how much do we? The next question is, how much do we thin our paint? Well, it depends on what you're doing, on what you want to do with your miniature paint. So generally, with oil paints, when you're thinning those out, you want a consistency that is like acrylic paint. I usually have mine probably a tad bit thicker than normal acrylic paint. I use this Grumbacher to show you what I mean. Grumbacher Rose Pink, by the way, very good, or pale pink rather, very good flesh color. Very good base for a flesh tone. This is what I use that for all the time. Anyway, where was I? So you're going to want to thin to, I got oil paint on my finger. You're going to want to thin to a acrylic consistency for basic painting if you're painting something like this. This is one of my works in progress. It's a Brute drone. I painted this on Twitch stream. This guy I'm using acrylic consistency for. So that's going to give you good coverage, and it's going to allow you to do some pretty good blending and that sort of thing. And it's not going to wipe off the layer of paint that's underneath. It's gonna mix in with that layer on the Mini. Essentially, is what it's going to do. So there's no real formula for how much thinner you need to get that consistency. You don't need a whole lot, couple of drops, probably about 5-6 drops if you want. But again, it depends on the type of paint you're using, because some paints have more oil in them than others, some are more heavily pigmented than others, and those are going to take more thinner to thin down. You're going to need more thinner to get to the consistency that you want. So, and you can see here, if you're looking, if you can, already just kind of dropping that on top of there, you can see that the pigment is starting to break down, the oil is starting to break down, and it's starting to kind of disperse in the white spirits, in the mineral spirits. So go ahead and take a mixing brush and mix this up. It's going to seem pretty watery, but as you mix it, the paint will break down and it'll get thicker. The mixture will get thicker. You don't want big chunks like that. And again, this is probably 5, 6, maybe 7 drops of paint. And that's actually a pretty good consistency. That's pretty much what we want right there. That is, oh, damn it, stupid water, get out of there. That is going to be about the consistency that we want for painting. That is acrylic consistency, roughly. Maybe a little bit thinner than a normal acrylic paint, but that's about what we want. That's a good consistency. That's something that we can work with. That's something that we can do something with. We're going to be able to push it around on the Mini, and it's not going to give us too much trouble. It'll cover pretty well in that case too. I probably need another paper towel, but you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to press on and keep going. So that's what you want for general painting. Acrylic consistency. I'm going to soak up this water because it's annoying me. So acrylic consistency, make it just like that. Excuse me as I wipe my hands off. Definitely need another paper towel. Whatever. Now, what if you're wanting to do an oil wash? What kind of consistency are you going to need then? Well, the acrylic consistency is not going to work very well for an oil wash because it's going to behave very similarly to acrylic paint. So you want to thin this down even further if you want to do an oil wash. What you're aiming to get is something close to the consistency of water, And what that's going to do is that's going to give a nice capillary action to the paint that's going to let it literally slide off of the raised areas and into the cracks and crevices on your Mini. And that is going to be the most satisfying thing that you can possibly do with oil paints. So let me get another color here. By the way, people out there, if you're out there and you're like, oh my God, he's wasting paint. This is literally nothing out of these tubes. There's so much more paint in these tubes than what I'm putting down here. So I'm not too terribly worried about it. So let's get some sap green, put it on a palette. Oh, by the way, don't think that you have to mix on a palette or anything like that. This is just how I do it, but you can actually pre-mix these paints too, if you want. You can pre-thin them. And there's a lot of oil painters that do that. I've actually done it myself. This tube right here, I've got a bunch of these. These are actually pre-thinned oil paints that I got from it was from a cheap little set from a company called Meaden that I got for like 12 bucks on Amazon, I think. So you can pre-thin, you can put them in water, in dropper bottles. You can do that just fine. These have been in here in these bottles for probably about almost 2 years now. The bottles are fine. It's not melting them or anything like that. The paint in them is good. It's not dried out. It works just fine. So when you're looking for oil wash consistency, remember I got my sap green right here. Good rule of thumb generally is put about double the amount of mineral spirits or the amount of white spirits in there as you did for the acrylic consistency. So I had about 6 or 7. We'll probably do about 12. That's a little bit less than 12. That's more like 10, 9. There's no hard and fast ratios or rules or anything like that for how many drops of thinner you need to put in to make the paint thin. You gotta eyeball it really. So you'll get an idea of how thin you need to make your paints the more you use them. So no hard and fast ratios or rules or anything like that. So go ahead and mix this up. And we can always add more thinner if we need to. We can always add more. Can't take away, but we can always add more if it ends up not being thin enough. But again, we're looking for something pretty close to the consistency of water. That's going to give us that nice capillary action. And yeah, a little bit more. Another couple drops. Again, some paints, they are very oil rich and pigment heavy, and it takes a lot more thinner to get them to where you want than others. Especially when you get into higher quality oil paints. Those I'm finding, because they're so pigment rich, it does take a lot more to thin those down than with the cheap stuff. So that's probably about where we want it from what I can see here. I don't know if you can see that, how easily that's sliding off the brush just as I tap it. So, but let me show you. Let me show you in a way that you'll be able to actually see. I'm just going to get a brush, get some paint on there. And then this is about what we want here, if you can see that. You see it's nice and thin. You'll notice when I tap the brush to my finger, the paint is getting into the knuckles. It's getting into those little folds and crevices and cracks. And this is what you want it to do on your Mini. This is the exact kind of thing you want. This is the capillary action. That's causing the oil paint to roll into those cracks and crevices. And this is exactly what you want. And this is literally the most fun and satisfying thing that you will ever do with oil paints. Just doing this, painting my hand, is actually really fun. And you notice I'm not brushing it on like you would with an acrylic wash, because that just kind of smears it, gets it all over. Just tapping. You just tap it and let the oil do the rest. It takes a little bit of getting used to. But this is oil wash consistency. Now, if you find, as you're working, that you're not getting that good capillary action, you're not getting it as much as it was before, that's because the thinner is drying. The thinner evaporates, and the more thinner you have in an oil paint, the quicker it'll dry. Normally, oil paints, if it's acrylic consistency, you're looking at a dry time of probably 1 to 2 days. Usually overnight, but maybe 2 days at the most. With oil washes, you're talking dry times of hours to minutes, depending on how much thinner you've got. But if you find that you're not getting as good capillary action before, and then it's kind of drying out on you, you just add a couple more drops. Stir it up, mix it. And there you go. You're good. You got that capillary action back. And you can keep going to town on your mini. Every now and again, I'll have to do this. Every now and again, I'll be working with something for a long time, or I'll step away for a second and come back and find that my thinner has evaporated and my oil is not doing what I want it to. So I'll just add more thinner. You can always add more thinner. Always. And the more thinner you add, the more of a capillary action you're going to get, and the more the paint's going to slide into those cracks and crevices on the mini. So there you go. That's how you thin your oil paints. We got acrylic consistency right here, and then we've got oil wash consistency right here. Use these. To get these, you use your odorless paint thinner, your odorless mineral spirits. If you really want to go whole hog, you can get the really expensive Winsor & Newton stuff that everybody's posting online. You don't need it. This stuff works just as well, and it's nowhere near as expensive. It'll last you a little bit of time, too. It'll last you a fair amount of time, too. You don't use a whole lot of thinner when you're doing oil painting, when you're thinning the paints out. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and leave this video right here. Let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. As always, if you liked what you saw, leave a like and subscribe to my channel. Turn on that bell notification so you will always know when I upload a new video. That sort of thing helps me out quite a bit. And I will see you all next time.